Hello, everybody. I hope you're doing well. Today we are going to do a little bit more background information on Shakespeare. I know previously we tried to watch the biography video. I know tech did not quite allow for that. But I will fill you in on some important details of his life, especially the ones having to do with his writing as well as kind of the impact that he has had on culture, on literature, even since his death. We're also going to talk a little bit about some of the themes in Tempest. That way, as you continue to read the play or watch the play, I have given you several options as far as taking in that content. So you have a link where you can read the play, there's a link where you can listen to the play, and then there is, I believe, a 1960 Richard Burton version of the play, and you can find other ones as well. There are also different websites that will take Shakespeare's English at the time and kind of translate it into more modern text or more contemporary English language. So that is something that you have available to you as well as you're taking in this content. We're going to go pretty far back though and start off here with a little bit of information about Shakespeare. He was born in Stratford upon Avon, so Avon. That's going to be in England. Whenever he was 18 years old, he married a woman named Anne Hathaway, not the Anne Hathaway that we know as an actress. This was the first one. But this was actually quite a scandal at the time. Shakespeare was 18, and Anne Hathaway was 26, which would have been considered a spinster at the time. I know that sounds a little wild these days, but most women would start looking for marriage prospects around 15, 16. So she had already been on the marriage market for 10 years. So um, this is not exactly the match that his parents would have wanted to make for him. They had a unplanned pregnancy, and this is what prompted them to have to get married. And Shakespeare, because of his age at the time, being 18, he had to have permission from his parents. But with the situation at hand, they were kind of backed into a corner and had to approve of this marriage. He would have a daughter with her from that first encounter, and then they would later go on to have twins, Judith and Hamnet, which a lot of people think is also kind of an inspiration for his play Hamlet as well. We believe there's not an exact date on his birth, but they do have record of when he was baptized, so they have a good idea about when he was born. But in London around 1592, and Lord Chamberlain is going to be important here because he would be part of Lord Chamberlain's men. That would be his acting troupe that he was involved in. His first theater the theater that he's most known for is the Globe Theater. He did this along with James Burbage. He was one of the acting troupe that he was with. And they were actually pretty successful. So his first play that he would end up performing there would be Julius Caesar. Shakespeare has a lot of different types of plays. He has historical, dramatic, comedies. And they ran into some issues, though, because at the time, a lot of the stuff in Shakespearean literature or in Shakespearean plays would be considered not very appropriate at the time. And because of that, there were civil laws kind of working against them. So their idea was this area of London would not allow for it, but if they moved across the Thames, then they could do kind of whatever they wanted to. So what they ended up doing was taking the Globe Theater apart piece by piece, so they didn't have to buy new building materials, and just moved it across the river and rebuilt it exactly as it was and started doing their plays again. Their plays were a place where anyone from the high aristocracy could attend, even to the lowly peasants. So you could get in for just a penny. of course, your seats were going to be different whenever you were kind of coming in, but it was a way to blend the social classes. And he also does this within his plays as well. He has a blending of lords and ladies with lower class people. And a lot of times in his plays, this is not so much evident in The Tempest, but a lot of times in his plays, you get a lot of wise information from these peasants who would normally not be listened to or they would be looked down upon. So he was bringing in the lower class people. Also, to us, Shakespearean language sounds very fancy, but at the time, that was the common tongue. So he was doing it in a way that was accessible to people, regardless of whether they were literate, whether they had any schooling or formal education. They would be able to understand his plays. So it really was a way to bring literature and culture to the masses. They did not have a lot going on as far as sets, but they did have very elaborate costumes. The Globe Theater was fantastic during the summer, but during the winter, it was not very temperature controlled. So they ended up opening the Blackfriars Theater. So this would be a place that was more suitable for colder weather. And The Tempest, which we are reading for class, was actually the first one that they performed there. And this was written by Shakespeare with this specific theater in mind. And even though they would perform there, because it was a different type of space and did not have as much kind of going on as the outdoor Globe Theater did, the production would have to be, they had to have lighting and special things going on that they didn't necessarily have to have with the Globe Theater. Shakespeare, of course, we know him for his plays. He also has a lot of sonnets within his work. Something that we could potentially work with next week is looking at a Shakespearean sonnet and comparing it to those Plutarchan sonnets that you got, or Petrarchan sonnets, so sorry, Petrarchan sonnets that you guys worked with a couple of weeks ago. His Shakespearean sonnets are definitely inspired by the Petrarchan sonnet. He does have a little bit of a different rhyming scheme, but he also uses iambic pentameter and has a octet and sestet. Well, and some of his end with a couplet though as well. And again, this is something, if we have time next week, we can kind of look closer at the poems, even though we're focusing more on the play when it comes to Shakespeare. He wrote a total of 38 plays that we know of. There was a lot of collaborative efforts when it came to writing plays at the time within the theater troupes. So there, of course, are different theories about who is doing the writing and which play has this specific writer that kind of comes in and helps Shakespeare. But that was just the nature of the way things were. People kind of try to paint it off as Shakespeare was taking credit for other people's work, whereas no, this is just what they did when they were writing plays. It was a collaborative effort. So there are plays that are not attributed to Shakespeare that he more than likely had a hand in as well. And Shakespeare never really wanted his plays to be recorded and published. He was more about the performance of the plays. He didn't want to print his plays. He just wanted them to be performed. But after his death, his friends published the first folio in 1623. And I'm very grateful that they did, because we now get to enjoy Shakespeare even up until this day. Now, this is not to say that the plays would not have continued on without the publishing of it, but I'm sure this has made it more accessible for people over the years. And just a great amount of work that we have. Now, this is a little different than kind of the moral implications that we discussed with Virgil, and Virgil not wanting the Aeneid to continue on after his death. This was not necessarily Shakespeare saying, burn all my stuff and don't let anybody see any of my work ever again. This was just a different way than he imagined sharing his work. My assumption, of course. Getting into the play that we're actually reading, The Tempest, there are a lot of different elements going on in this play. We know from the first act that we went over the other day that there is an element of magic, right? So our protagonist, well, we could argue about protagonist versus antagonist with Prospero, but Prospero, of course, has been reading these magical books. He casts these spells. He has these magical creatures like Ariel and Caliban who help him, power and control. So, who has the actual power is something that is shifting, both with the backstory having to do with the play and also within the play itself. Betrayal. We know that Prospero has been betrayed by his brother. Revenge and forgiveness. We'll see how those things play out. Freedom is an element that both Ariel and Caliban are seeking. We're also going to see maybe a little bit of that with Miranda as well. And then there's the underlying theme of colonization. So you have in this instance a unknown island. Some people have looked at references within the text and associated this island as being something close to the Americas. So something that would be associated with the British Empire and what the British Empire was doing at the time. And of course, we can't speak for Shakespeare, but a lot of people have read it as a critique on colonization, especially because you have at this time a wide expansion of the British Empire that started, of course, well, before Queen Elizabeth, but definitely expanded with Queen Elizabeth. And then you have King James the First as well during this time period. Um, I mentioned some of these already, the ambiguity of the location of the island. Um, there's also some critique done on Caliban. It's actually an anagram, people believe, for cannibal. So this is perhaps showing how people would treat or see or villainize indigenous people. You also have elements of this in Shakespeare's Othello, where he kind of alludes to how people assume things about people from different cultures and different backgrounds and ethnicities. Um, and there's also source material to relate this to a specific 1609 shipwreck, especially the line where it discusses that everyone survived, is very similar to how it's written in the play. And so these are things that I definitely want you guys to kind of think about and hold on to, because these would be great for discussions next week as we continue the play. And it also, to me, is relevant to the debate we had during our discussion of the Aeneid as well. This idea of taking over a place that is already inhabited, and what are the implications of that. This had definitely a huge impact on post-colonial literature. So post-colonial literature is going to be anything that is written that harkens back to colonial times and also critiques it and speaks to the lasting repercussions of post-colonial times, or to colonial times. I think that the term post-colonial might be a little bit of a misnomer in my opinion, because I am of the belief that we're not necessarily in a post-colonial culture. We just don't necessarily call places colonies anymore, but that's my own kind of take on it. Prospero and Caliban is a later work that was written. Aimé César's Un Tempte. Sorry, I am terrible with other languages. Actually has a majority person of color cast within it. So this is definitely talking about race relations and post-colonialism. And then we have Roberto Fernandez Redemar's Caliban. So if you're interested in this text and also post-colonialism, this could be something that you could look into as well. We are not going to have you guys answer this today because I do want you to focus on finishing your paper. But these are some potential discussion questions that we could talk about next week, or these are some things that might end up on your final exam. So kind of paying attention to these and kind of preparing it would be an idea. How are power and magic connected to each other in the play? How does the line between human and God affect power dynamics in the play? The only really god or goddess we have is not necessarily present within the play. You do have Caliban, her descendant, um, but you also have humans taking on these maybe godlike roles as well. So this is a kind of interesting comparison to what we went over with the some of our previous works. And then I also want you guys to consider about women in the play, taking into account that they were working with all male cast at the time. Women were not allowed to be actors or actresses at the time. And we only really have one decidedly female character, which is Miranda. And this is not so in other Shakespeare plays. So this is definitely something that we can explore. All right. I will quit taking up y'all's time so y'all can get back to work on your paper. I hope you guys are having a great weekend so far, and I will see you all in class on Monday.